Thank you so
Hi.
much, Tracy. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. I've been able to join a couple of these Methow at home events, often just kind of tuning in to be able to hear some of the presentations. And yeah, I really appreciate this as a forum. And we're really excited to engage with you all today to share an update on where we are with this Methow Valley climate action planning process. Talk about some of the climate impacts we've already been experiencing and what's expected in the Methow Watershed. And then talk about some of the ways that you all can be engaged in contributing to the plan, participating in the implementation. And we really want to engage you and hear, you know, what aspects of this work really are most relevant to you, and yeah, really seek to get your input. So I'll pass it over to Jasmine here in a moment, and then we'll do this presentation. But before we start, I mean, I think the connection in your community is so strong. I've been lucky enough back when contra dancing was actually a thing we could do, which is hard to imagine right now. I went to some of the at home contra dances and really appreciated those. And I see some familiar names, and I don't know everyone. So we want to just take a few minutes just to do a really brief introduction. And so we'll just ask for two things. So your name, and then completing a sentence. And the sentence is, when I picture climate change, I see. So, and we'll give you a moment for think time. So when I picture climate change, I see. And they're all correct answers, no matter what it is, even if it's abstract, whatever it means to you. We don't need to explain it. It'll just be a way to kind of give us a little taste of what's on people's minds when they think about climate change. And then I think when we have folks participate from homes that have multiple people, we can just have both of those people go together. And now on Zoom, you may have found that conversations can be a bit challenging, because nobody knows who's going to speak next. It's not, you can't read the energy the same way you can in a room. So the way we'll do this is I'll start, and then I'll call on someone, and then they go, and then they call on somebody and they go, and we just kind of pass it that way. Okay. And if you don't wish to share, this is participation by choice. So if you don't feel like sharing, just please unmute yourself for a moment and just say, just pass it to somebody, just choose somebody. Okay, so again, my name's Joshua. I live up, well, I won't add more right now. My name's Joshua, and when I picture climate change, I see the Borealis Glacier in North Cascades National Park. And I'll ask Jasmine, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and go?
Sure. I'm Jasmine Minbashian. I'm the Executive Director of Methow Valley Citizens Council. And when I think of climate change, I think of opportunity.
Okay, why don't you go ahead and just choose somebody, Jasmine?
Oh, right. I'm going to pick Frauke.
Hi, I'm Frauke Rind, and when I picture climate change, I picture many things, but I think right now, foremost for me is less smoke in the air. Oh, I've got to pick somebody. Carolyn. Oh, Carol Ann, sorry.
Hi, I'm Carol Ann Steinebach. Climate change, I always think about the poor countries, especially islanders, being washed away. And my sister is actually an islander, but on Long Island. But I think she's only 10 feet above sea level. So yeah, a rising ocean is what worries me.
Thank you, Carol Ann. Could you select somebody to go next?
Sure. Val, so nice to see you. Oh my gosh.
Hello, it's nice to be here. I'm Valerie Sukhavati, and when I think of climate change, I've had to move. I'm now in Lacey near Olympia. And so I sort of am facing climate change every day. As far as I'm concerned, it's very different than the Methow, and probably the just plain warming of the ocean and the air and everything is the thing I think of most. And I'm supposed to choose? Okay. How about, who do I know here? I don't need to know you. How about Tracy Prowler?
Okay, thanks, Val. Yeah, when I picture climate change, I picture a need for innovation in clean energy and food sovereignty and transportation innovation. So, and I welcome everyone. I'm so glad you're all here. I'm going to pass the baton to Kristen Piercy.
Hi. When I think of, or I picture climate change, I think of, it just brings to mind the natural processes happening at a much more rapid pace. And I will pass it to Terry Dixon.
Okay. Well, I just got back on, so I don't, I
Yeah,
lost
let
my
me-
connection. I
Yeah,
lost my connection on my computer, so I'm on my phone. So I'm just going to say, I picture living in Florida without moving.
Let me just,
I'm just being funny. No, I seriously, I picture the polar bears not having their ice flows. I picture what the last person said, that it's natural progress that's just sped up by the humans, that we're causing everything to accelerate.
maybe we
I
could,
can't pass the baton because I can't see anything.
yeah, Joshua, can you just let the folks who've just come on, there's a few more jumping on. So just let's let them know what's happening. And
Yeah, great. Thanks, Tracy. So we're just sharing our name, and then we're completing the sentence. When I picture climate change, I see, and whatever comes up for you is the correct answer. And then after you share, you choose someone else, and then we just pass the baton that way. If you don't feel like participating, you can just simply pass and pick somebody else. So why don't maybe if we could go to Dean Karath next. Are you?
Sure, just had to unmute. When I picture climate change, I see a rather pessimistic view of wildfires, smoke, and loss of snowpack, and this ability to go skiing that I love to do.
Thanks, Dean. I hit that. Could you choose somebody next?
About Tuck.
Okay, I guess when I picture climate change, it takes a lot more than a sentence to describe it. But what I imagine is, or what I envision is the forced evolution and adaptation of both natural and human communities. So I'll pick Betsy Weiss.
When I picture climate change, I see my grandchildren.
I think the cat's out of the bag, and I'm interested in what we can do locally to make things more tolerable. But we are, as Tuck says, looking at adaptation.
David Clement.
Yeah, that's me.
And I'll pick Jill Calvert.
Yeah, I am Jill Calvert. When I think of climate change, I'm going to go and hope and dream for the positive. And I envision an Earth that is in balance with its inhabitants. I am going to pick Melanie.
I had to unmute, and I am Melanie. when I picture climate change, I think of the Arctic. There was just an article about how the Arctic is so far ahead of the rest of the planet in the warming and changes. And so it's unfortunately showing us what climate change is in a bigger way than we're seeing in other places. So that's what I think of. And I will pick, boy, who hasn't gone here? Carolyn.
When I think of climate change, I'm Carolyn Lauren. I think of a doctor couple that I met at Rainier snowshoeing, and they matter-of-factly said that a fifth of their country would be disappearing. So I'm hoping for miracles, and perhaps an effort like this will lead to some.
And perhaps if it's hard to choose somebody who hasn't gone yet, maybe folks could just raise their hand if you haven't shared yet.
There's a Gloria. How about the Gloria?
Sorry, I heard my dog barking. I left to go look out the window. Anyway, I'm mostly concerned with the sea level rising, which is probably not a problem here in the Methow. And of course, the dryness of the climate, which is a problem in the Methow. So Lincoln and Janet, Laura?
Go ahead.
I have a pessimistic view. I'm Janet Lohr, and I have a pessimistic view of conflict and famine. And you're next.
Okay. And I'm Lincoln Lohr, and I look at it in sea level rise, ocean changes, ocean acidification, and ocean temperature rise effects. And we'll go to, has Kristen Percy talked yet?
Yeah, Kristen shared.
She did.
Maybe I see Tom Jones. Maybe Tom.
Okay,
and
we'll go with Jones.
There you go.
Hi, good morning. When I think of climate change, I think of climate out of balance, a global challenge for each country, and stubborn optimism. A lot of work, but it's well worth it for our generations that follow us. So I remain optimistic.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you all. Has there anyone that hasn't been able to share that would like to? You could raise your hand. Okay, so is it Jacques?
Jackie?
Jackie and Paul.
Yeah, Paul Smith. And when I think of climate change, I think of it in the long term and how it will play out. And I could define it with a saying that goes, I expected the worst, and it was worse than I expected. That the loss of habitat of coastal areas is going to cause a migration of global warming refugees that's going to put pressure on borders and governments. And without sufficient planning and anticipation of that, I think I expect chaos in the world. Hope for better, but I'm expecting the worst. Jackie, is everybody done?
How about Mary McCree?
Is Mary still here? Maybe we might have lost Mary. How about, who's at 996-3101?
I think that's
Eric Burr.
All right, welcome, Eric.
And when I
Eric,
think
would
of
you like to-
climate change, I think of the need. I don't have a picture, so I just have to go by the sound. And I'll keep talking. When I think of climate change, I think of the need for higher groomed trails because we're going to lose the Winthrop Trailhead very soon. And I don't think we've heard from Denny O'Callahan yet.
Is Denny here? I don't see Denny, but George Grable just came on.
Yes. Hello.
So George, we're just giving our name and just sharing one thing we picture when we think of climate change, if you'd like to.
Okay.
Oh, George, you just went muted. There you go.
One thing I think of when I think of climate change, the effect on our winters here in the Methow Valley and the extent of activities that we may lose because of that, the skiing and the lack of snowpack and the effect on the fishery and yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's gonna happen.
Great, thanks, George. Well, thank you all for sharing. One, it's great to meet you, those that I haven't met before, and also just to hear the range of what you shared, from very local aspects of climate change to very global. So much empathy, and just clearly you all are really leaning in and learning and really connected to the larger challenge at hand. And I also really appreciated the range of the concern for what we face, the challenge ahead, and in knowing that we don't one thing, there isn't one solution. It's going to take many seeds to address climate change. And I also appreciated the way that solutions came up in many answers too, that we hold a real tension in this work. It's referred to as a wicked problem because it is so complex, and it's going to take a whole host of solutions to address. So with that, I'll go ahead and share my screen. We have a presentation, and I'll pass it over to Jasmine to lead us in the beginning of that presentation. So thank you for participating in that activity. That was great.
Jasmine, you are muted, just so you know.
Now I know. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Joshua. As I mentioned earlier, before some new people came on, my name's Jasmine Minbashian. I'm the director of Methow Valley Citizens Council. I took the position in 2018. I had spent about 2 decades in the field of wildlife and forest conservation as my career. And I took a short break from that to teach horseback riding at Methow Valley Riding Unlimited for a few years. And when I saw the position open at Methow Valley Citizens Council, I said, that job has my name written all over it. And the first thing that I discussed with our board of directors, Melanie is on our board as well, and so is Tom Jones. So we have 2 of our board members here in attendance, is the importance of creating a vision around climate that's local for the Valley. And so that was really the first charge I received from the board when I first was hired 2 years ago. So I scratched my head and said, how are we going to go about this? And after a lot of reflection, really realized, as Joshua mentioned, this is a wicked problem. This is very complex, and it's not a problem that one organization alone can solve. This is the type of problem that our entire community needs to come together and rally and work together and have a shared vision about how we're going to solve this problem locally and what's our role in the larger global problem. So with that, we set off on a mission to really explore how we were going to do this. And it became very clear that we were going to need to pull together a task force of community members, community leaders, scientists, marshal all the expertise we could have access to, and pull together a group to develop a climate action plan. So our first meeting was in April 2018. We assembled a group of really directors from different organizations and agencies representing, actually, if you could go back, Joshua, thank you. Different agencies that represented different parts of our community, whether it was our natural systems, our agricultural systems, our economy, tourism, the insurance industry, recreation. We tried to cast as broad a net as possible, social services. We brought everyone into the room and we said, you know, how are we going to begin to solve this problem? And first step was really to define what is the problem? What are the impacts that are specific to the Methow? Because we've all heard the reports on the news, kind of the broad projections globally, but what does it really mean for the Methow? And for that, we are very lucky to have some incredible resources right here in the Valley. I'm sure some of you are familiar with Dr. Amy Snover. She is the director of the Climate Impacts Group at University of Washington, and she also has a house up in Pine Forest. And her father, Kurt, is a full-time resident. So she gladly stepped up to help us evaluate what specifically climate impacts in the Valley were going to look like. And we had a general sense, but we wanted to really dive into that. And as you can see here, it really touches every aspect of the things that we love here in the Valley. I don't know how many of you were on the call last night with the Methow Conservancy, the Four Thoughts, but I don't know about you, but I was so moved by that. It was so beautiful, and it really, to me, captured a lot of the things that we do love about the Valley that are hard to define in just one word on a slideshow. It's complex. And how do we preserve those things? How do we keep those things intact? That's our challenge ahead. So if you now could advance to the next slide, Joshua, I can talk a little bit about Amy. So these are some of the larger trends that we're starting to see. It's clear that we are in it. It's happening, and we don't have a lot of time left. So that's the bad news that we all are familiar with. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that. We're going to move to the next slide. Let's talk about the Methow specifically. So we had Amy come out. She did a workshop for the community. It was exactly a year ago, and we had a huge turnout. Several hundred people filled the community center back in the day when we could all gather and cram into a small space. And she presented really some specific information related to the Methow Basin. And some of the big takeaways I'm just going to cover really briefly here are what, some of you mentioned this earlier in our go around, but really what we're facing is a smaller winter snowpack. That's going to set off a series of impacts, including faster runoff, the intensity of, we're going to have less water as a result later in the year. And we're going to have more intense, higher volume rain events, especially in the spring. So that's we're going to see not necessarily a reduction in the amount of precipitation. It's really the timing that is going to shift. The peak flows are all going to shift earlier in the season. We're going to have higher peak flows earlier, and then we're going to see it run off faster and become drier earlier in the year. So that's kind of one big major trend. If you could advance the next slide. So we're in it already. When you look at just Washington State, you can see there's a lot of indications to say this is not something that's going to be happening in the future. It's happening right now. I was surprised to learn from Amy that the Washington Cascade snowpack has already decreased by 25% between mid 20th century and 2006. And this, you know, that's data that's 14 years old. So that was pretty notable. We're already seeing the record highs and record lows for coldest day of the year. And also with, you know, the one we all know are most familiar with is the number of large fires have dramatically increased. I don't know about you, but several of us have been evacuated more than once. So it's just something we're unfortunately learning to live with, is these large fire events. Next slide. So here's just some more predictions. As I mentioned, let's start on the left hand corner. That graph really just highlights that we're on a trajectory. The red line is the trajectory that we're currently on. If we stay on that trajectory, we can expect the average temperature to be 6 degrees warmer. If we get into gear and we start to implement some of the recommendations from the Paris Accord, and we are able to reduce our emissions, get to very low emissions, then we're still going to be looking at an increase in temperature at this point, but it's going to be not as high, 4.6 degrees warmer. I was talking earlier about the shifts in stream flow. That's the graph on the far upper right. You see that peak graph just shifts earlier in the season. One other point that I haven't mentioned yet is the mean stream temperature, which is in the bottom right corner. That is going to shift as well. So the main reaches of the Methow are going to be warmer. So cold water refugia for salmon is going to go, those upper reaches are going to become more and more important for that. So I don't want to spend too much time on the bad news, but it's very important. I mean, I think it's important because it's sobering, and it creates a sense of urgency and focus for our mission at hand. And I think that's what's been able to bring this large group of people together to problem solve, is knowing that we don't have a lot of time. We have some serious issues in front of us, but so we have to start rolling up our sleeves and get to problem solving. This is just another graph that just shows how it's going to change over time, where in the next 20 years, in the next 40 years, in the next 60 years, increase in stream flow. I think generally what I'd like to say about this slide is the good news overall is that the Methow, in comparison to a lot of other watersheds in the state, is actually going to fare a lot better. So don't tell anybody, but we here in the Methow are actually pretty well positioned to adapt to climate change, in the sense of when it comes to water. We're going to have the same volume of water, but it's just going to come earlier in the season and it's going to run off faster. So we're just going to figure out how is the best way to work with that new system of delivery, and how do we slow the runoff of water on our landscape. The bad news obviously is the fires, and we're going to expect higher fire, more intense fires, more frequent fires. That's something we're already managing. So that's basically the message that Amy came last year and delivered to us. And from that, the Climate Task Force has spent the last year really evaluating what that means for our valley and what are the impacts that we're going to be needing to address, and which of those are things that we need to address right away. And so for that piece, I'm going to hand it over to Joshua, and he's going to explain where we're at in that process and what we've come up with so far.
Great, thank you, Jasmine. Yeah, that's terrific. So the Climate Action Task Force is a broad coalition of over 40 people that represent organizations, agencies, businesses, government, local government entities. And so they've been working for almost a year and a half now on drafting this climate action plan and making recommendations in terms of how we can adapt to this changing climate. And some of these programs you're already familiar with, that have to do with, making your homes fire ready, conserving water, trying to keep more water in the mountains, especially with the reintroduction of beaver. There's a lot of adaptation that's happening in the valley. And so the task force is really charged with identifying, okay, what are those actions that can really increase our resilience, so our ability to basically get through the impacts we experience and then recover from them. And then also in terms of identifying our opportunities for lowering our contribution towards climate change through the emissions that we are generating as humans. So the task force, at this stage, has basically made a core set of recommendations, and we're drafting the plan as we speak, and we hope to have a draft early 2021 that we'll look to you to engage with and provide feedback on. And it's really framed around, again, that resiliency, adapting to the changing climate, and then really looking towards creating a low carbon future. And, I think that part of it, again, like that contrast in the sharing you did in the introductions, as much as when we think about climate change, we think of the challenges, we really see the opportunities as well. And we organize the task force, it's in different sectors. So we have people who do their work in infrastructure, especially from the towns, folks that represent human health and safety, economy, natural systems, and then water. So the task force was divided into these different groups to really dig into solutions that address the issues that impact each one of those sectors. And I want to emphasize that climate change is really a public health issue, and it's really an economic issue as well, as much as it's an environmental issue. And I think that you all, just from the way you shared and around how you already experience climate change, I think know that firsthand, that it really intersects every sector of our lives. It's not just about environment, and it's as much local as it is global. And I think that in talking with Julie Tate of Twistworks, they're doing a survey right now that I'd encourage everybody to go to their website and contribute to and fill out. And they're going to have that open for quite some time. So the results are preliminary, but she shared yesterday that so far, of the over a couple hundred people that have responded to it, the majority, the number one concern that they have is climate change. And so, I think that we as a broader community are really facing this together, and people are tuned into wanting to know what those solutions are. And so when we think about climate solutions, we can really recognize that that we have this is really about opportunities, not just, it's not about limitations, and I think that when we think about the adaptation that we can engage in, especially when we think about the infrastructure and how that exists in our towns, in our transportation systems, that we have a real opportunity to address issues that have already existed and do that in sync with what's really emerging on a state level as well as a national level in terms of goals that have been set towards carbon neutrality. So we can see this as an opportunity to be ahead of the curve or with the curve, making the changes we need to, and in the amount of time that they're needed, as opposed to really being kind of behind the times with those opportunities and resources, the funding that could be available for us to help us with some of those changes. So the task force worked in these different sectors. We established vision and some principles that then guide the planning process, and then set the priorities for actions. Okay. The one other piece that I'll tie into the task force is the subgroups as well. So we had kind of this core task force that was really working in all of those sectors, and then we broadened that engagement as well for additional community members that could contribute in those sector areas. The community engagement part is really essential to us, and so as Jasmine shared, we had 300 people show up, over 300 people show up to a community center last year to engage at the beginning of the process. And we're just approaching another phase of outreach to be able to engage the public in. Now that we have basically a summary of what the plan looks like and a lot of those priorities that are emerging, we want to be able to engage the community once again to get additional input. So a quick look at the process up to date. We went from that public presentation last December to subgroups discussing solutions, identifying those priorities. Then we had a draft, an emissions study done on the entire Methow Watershed, which we're updating to finalize. But that could really inform where we want to focus the most attention in terms of how we can reduce emissions and tie that to the recommended actions in the plan. And so over the last 2 months, we've been reviewing and revising the core plan content, and then forming a mitigation group that basically the mitigation of our carbon that or all greenhouse gases that we're emitting, primarily carbon. And so those recommendations came to the task force and were integrated. And so for the last month, chapters are being drafted and we're refining those priorities. And then coming up tomorrow, we have this public event at 5 o'clock. It's 5 to 7. So you all are invited, and I'll show you the website a little later in this presentation, but we're looking for the largest community engagement we can get to give people an update on where we are with the plan, and share basically the summary of what the task force has come up with so far. So the task force framed the vision for this work is around a resilient Methow plans for and successfully responds to our changing climate. Our resilience is measured by the health of our air, water, land, people, and all living things. And I'd say what you all shared resonates a lot with what's in that vision. We're looking at this set of guiding principles for collaborating for smart water management, investing in clean energy, building a diverse economy, developing land appropriately, adapting infrastructure for future needs and changing conditions, promoting socially, environmentally, and culturally sensitive tourism, supporting local agriculture and securing local food, seeking zero emissions transportation solutions for all, working towards a carbon neutral future, and housing our population safely, affordably, and efficiently. The values that really framed the planning process are really oriented around human health and safety, so that all members of our community especially those most vulnerable, are taken care of. Establishing sustainable livelihoods and having the ability to make a living and be able to afford a place to live in the valley. The built environment, so that that's sustainable and reliable, resilient and healthy natural systems, which in the triangle on the left, you'll see that natural systems really create the base for our community resilience. Then we have the built environment, our livelihoods, which result in human well-being. And really at calling out as well the well-being of future generations and a responsibility to them. So then the outcomes of the plan are really framed around having abundant water to sustain nature and people, having a resilient, healthy, and abundant natural systems, having our community be prepared and safe, so knowing that we will face adversity with especially wildfire, and moving towards a low carbon efficient, livable and resilient built environment, and then having a very place-based and diverse economy, a vibrant future for agriculture, and eventually a carbon neutral Methow. And when we think of that, we can consider that, the state has goals that by 2050, that the state will be carbon neutral. And so this is our opportunity through this plan to think about, do we want to align exactly with that goal to meet that, or do we want to exceed that and set a different goal for our community? So the plan, I'm going to go through these pretty quickly just in the interest of time, because we want to make sure we have time for questions and some conversation. But you can see the different types of actions that are framed in the plan, the scale of actions, so that there are elements of what individuals, which each of us can do, what we can do on a community level that can be coordinated by organizations for leadership from the towns themselves and businesses to model, and then what we can do on a regional, state, and even national level. I think that what's really unique about this climate action planning process is we don't have a municipality like the city of Bellingham that has decided to do this climate action plan, and then they're charged with implementing it. This is really a grassroots effort, and having the plan be generated from the community, and then being able to get that adopted and engaged on those higher levels, while connecting to the goals on that the state might have. So then the task force has identified our kind of priority actions, the things that we can do near term in the next 1 to 3 years, some of those that are a little bit longer term, and then really also addressing some of the big thinking. What are those solutions that you might think of as far as like ideal climate solutions, but they might not seem so feasible right away, but that we would love to be able to consider how to get there so we can have high impact. One thing we really want to emphasize as well is the way that equity is practiced in the climate action planning process, so that we're providing that added support to disadvantaged groups so everyone can experience the benefits from all of the actions that come out of this plan. So this does require special attention to the most vulnerable in our community to balance the disparities so we can all thrive. And the way we do this by applying a multi-solving lens. And so when we think about the things that we need to address in terms of adapting for climate change, so many of those intersect with other equity issues that already exist. And so we have the opportunity to address both at the same time when we look towards climate solutions. Many of those also show up even right now, just in the pandemic, and the intersections in terms of who is impacted in our communities the most by these adversities. So just really briefly on the emissions study that we have a draft conducted on, I'll just have you focus on the circle on the left. That the green represents the emissions from carbon into the atmosphere on a landscape level from forest fires, and also changes to land use. And then what's in the blue is the community contributions to CO2. And so you can see that what's happening on a landscape level really dwarfs what we're contributing in our community. So that really makes us emphasize how much we really need to address, the forest, the work in terms of really doing forest health and restoration work. In terms of what we can do in terms of the human caused emissions, you can see clearly that all of that green represents transportation. The light green, light vehicles, tourist ones are separated out in the darker green. And so right away, just a quick look at the results of that emissions study, we can see that we can have some of our greatest impact if we focus in on what we're doing around transportation. And so for the task force and the mitigation group being able to identify then, okay, what does that look like in action? And that could certainly be having the infrastructure for electric charging stations for electric vehicles, increasing the access and ridership for public transportation using Trango, coming up with more community-based solutions like having rideshare abilities. So maybe there's a set places where if people once we're through the pandemic could pick people up if they're headed a certain direction in the valley. Just basically ways to reduce the number of kind of single rider trips happening in the valley, which is a challenge in a rural place for sure. I'm gonna skip this. This is just the Washington emission targets. So basically with that goal of the chart on the right just being that by 2050, those emissions are down to zero, that we're carbon neutral. Let's see. So in the interest of time, I'll just show you these slides, and this is a little bit of a primer so that you'll join us tomorrow night, where part of the presentation in our public forum tomorrow is to go through and really share the outcomes of the plan so far. And so you can get a deeper dive tomorrow if you join us. So the top 7 outcomes that we have are around abundant water to sustain nature and people. And you can see in the middle of this slide, the different goals that have been set by the task force. So efficiently using and conserving water, and then a number of others, and then some recommended priority actions. So the top one on that list being retaining water rights in the valley to ensuring that the towns have adequate water rights. The second outcome around having those resilient, healthy, abundant natural systems. Having a community prepared and safe in the event of adversity. And that could include smoke readiness, so that we have clean air spaces when we're experiencing wildfire events, as well as the fire adaptation around our homes. Having a low carbon efficient and affordable built environment. So thinking about sustainable living practices. Having a thriving place-based economy with equity for all. So really thinking about how we can adapt to the impacts that Jasmine shared, and many of you really associated strongly with winter, and just recognizing the impact that climate is having on snowpack. Having a vibrant future for agriculture, and striving towards that carbon neutral Methow. So I know I had to brush over those quickly. I'm just recognizing that time-wise, we want to be able to hear more from you. So just want to leave you with this invitation to participate, to get engaged in this work to build resiliency in our community. So you can join us tomorrow night from 5 to 7. You can register. It's a Zoom link, so it's free, and you can just go to resilientmethow.org and sign up for that event. If you can't make it tomorrow night, we're also going to record it and then post it on the website, so you'll be able to watch it after that. We'll also be posting a summary document about what has been established for the plan so far on the website, And then there's a brief survey that we're inviting people to fill out to contribute. What are some of the priorities that that resonate with you and your experience? And then the ability to sign up if you'd like to participate in education events or get involved in community projects that are addressing some of the actions coming out of the Climate Action Plan. And then when we have the plan released early 2021, it would be great to have you review it. It will also be available on the Resilient Methow website, and then provide us feedback. I think that one of the things that we're doing over this next month and a half is meeting with many different organizations and groups and getting specific input from those perspectives in terms of not only what resonates for those different groups and connects to work they may already be doing and might be able to provide more leadership in, but especially to be able to get that perspective, and especially for Methow at Home, that the aspects that connect directly to aging in place in the Methow Valley, for being able to address how climate connects with those issues and concerns. You are the people that are going to be the most helpful in informing how we can strive for those solutions. And if you have any questions or ideas, info@resilientmethow.org is where you can reach us. Okay. So I'll just wrap up and just share that, we're really looking at transformation, towards an ethos of sustainability. And so, despite the challenges ahead and, the odds we face in the work we have, we know that the solutions are going to need to be many. We all have a different part to play. And, I think that as we engage as individuals, and a community, we're really thinking about this ethos of sustainability, that we're really going through a transformation in thinking about relationship to how we live in place and how we adapt to a changing climate. Okay, so with that, why don't we open it up for any questions or comments, reflections anyone has?
I just want to jump in and say thank you so much for all of that incredible work. And there's still so much that goes into this final picture that you've shown us here today. And so just want to honor all that collaborative effort that's gone into bringing us to today. So yeah, let's hear from folks. Go ahead and just raise your hand or jump in with a comment or a question.
I had a question, and this would be pertinent to the goals of Methow at Home and being able to age in place. And it kind of concerns the changing demographics of the valley. And it's easy to see that what's going on with the demand for homes and properties is becoming a critical issue. The prices are going to be going up. And it's easy to see too that Washington offers one of the refuge from water crisis. And then we're going to be seeing more water refugees, and the people with money are going to push the prices higher. One of the things that affects elder people, since we're not buying homes, we already have our home. But when taxes are based on market values, it unfairly raises the taxes. And some states have tax law revisions that have helped protect people stay in their own home, because there are many stories of people losing their home due to taxes. Has there been any discussion within your group about being an advocate for tax reform? That's my observation and question.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I mean, we've definitely, it is a big part of the plan is to address affordable housing and housing options in the valley, and helping people stay in their homes too, I think should be added to that. I think, what's exciting about the plan is that it's really a commitment. it's all these organizations and individuals and even agencies and the towns, the towns of Twist, Winthrop, and Pateros coming together and saying, yes, we support this vision and we support the goals of this plan and the actions identified. But it really marks the beginning of the hard work. It's more of the beginning than the end. And as part of that, we can envision that we're going to have different groups working on different issues. And one of those has already formed, and that's an affordable housing brain trust, if you will. It's being led by Methow Housing Trust and Room One and TwistWorks, and also Methow Valley Citizens Council has been invited to participate. So I've been in those discussions because I think how we build is really, we need to think about how we do that in an equitable way, but also in an environmentally sensitive way. So yes, to answer your question, we have not specifically looked at the tax issue, but since I am part of that group, I will bring that to the table and put that on the table for discussion. We're in a place where we're looking at different places and how they've addressed this issue. Like we're looking, for example, places in Colorado can provide some examples of how they've overcome this very problem.
Good, thank you.
Other questions or comments? And Tracy, we'll leave it to you to let us know time-wise.
Carolyn has her.
Yeah, just further to what Paul said about staying in one's home. Caretakers, we don't have enough people to caretake elderly. And I was wondering if there was any organization among all these wonderful organizations that could help bring in people, give them affordable housing, or even have live-in people who don't live here, because I looked when Aegon was so sick for help and it just wasn't there. And I'm looking at myself now as I'm aging, and it's even less there than it was. So as well as taxes, I mean, I don't know about the tax issue. A lot of places do allow elderly people to put a halt on their taxes where they are, and the county would take a lien against the estate eventually. But that's just one possibility. But caretaking and people, service help. I know restaurants need service help too. They're not in the picture right this minute, but they will be back. We need a lot more entry-level people coming here. And I wouldn't say fewer people with money, because you just can't stop that. But we need to find some way of bringing in people who can do the jobs that need doing.
Yeah, that's a great point, Carol Ann. And, you know, Room One, Jamie's place and Methow at Home, we've been in conversation about the caretaker, you know, issue, and it's complicated. It's also kind of a wicked problem. Is there, and what you're addressing, you know, because it is getting to be more expensive to be here. So these are big, important issues you're raising.
Yeah. One thing that we continually face with implementing the plan is that we, like as Joshua mentioned, we are not a municipality, so we don't have a lot of resources to throw at some of these things. So we have to be creative. We've always done things in the Methow through community organizing. That's why we have like 60 nonprofits in our valley, right? Because we fill the need with people power and fundraising, and that works for the most part. But it also, when you have challenging situations like climate and vulnerable populations, the stakes are higher. But one thing I've really liked is I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Map Your Neighborhood project that's being done by the, I think it's the
Methow Ready.
Methow Ready. And I always thought, oh, would it be really cool to include in Map Your Neighborhood, just not just being ready for fire, emergency, but also who are the vulnerable people in our immediate community? Do we have a system to check on them, especially when there are crises, and or maybe if there's smoke events? You know, it's not necessarily related to just wildfire, but smoke events. Are they have adequate air filtration systems in their home? Do they need help setting one up? You know, that's just one example of ways that we can provide support on some of these climate related impacts.
Yeah, I just want to let folks know, that we are over the 11 o'clock hour, and also for Joshua and Jasmine, but there was a question that came in. So if anyone feels like you need to go, feel free, but if you can stay a few minutes more, I think it's such a big, important issue that we're talking about here. And here's a message from Tuck. Was the pie chart of emissions the net or just emissions without consideration of sequestration? The human emissions can't be driven so negative as to counterbalance the natural emissions. And why is carbon neutrality the right goal? Do we have to go carbon negative to return to CO2 levels to pre-industrial levels, or shouldn't regions like ours attempt to counterbalance others with neutral is very difficult or impossible?
I love that. Yeah, I love that thinking, you know, and I think that spirit of not just doing like what, you know, what might kind of get us by, but really connecting us with the impacts that other people are feeling around the world, you know. And I think that, you know, if carbon sequestration, especially from, you know, our agricultural practices and what happened in terms of our forest management, if we can basically sequester a third of, you know, the greenhouse gas emissions that are going into the atmosphere, that's a huge part of the solution. And so, you know, absolutely, like as much as we can do, especially in terms of that forest management and land use change that we experience, can be a huge part of that. The pie chart, so the sequestration is accounted for in the emissions study. It's one of the pieces that, as we move towards the final draft of the emissions study, we're trying to work with how those numbers were figured. We decided for the emissions study, you know, that essentially, like, starting with those goals around, okay, first we start heading in that direction of trying to mitigate what the community is generating, so the human caused emissions. And just because of that scale of what's happening on the forest, that it would be so overwhelming to think about how we would be able to reduce our emissions so much to account for the local landscape. But it was something the task force talked extensively around, is, you know, especially the mitigation group that formed, you know, is how do we hold ourselves accountable for the emissions that come from the landscape that we live in? And that's where, especially when we think about the land managing agencies, and being able to, you know, to show up to really, you know, contribute to coming up with the solutions of how we approach that, being so critical. So I appreciate that question, and it's Robin. It's from Robin's computer anyway. Feel free to follow up too if you'd like to engage more around the emissions work. Be happy to follow up more.
We have to protect our old trees as well, our big old trees, and that's a really important part of all of this when we look at that landscape chart.
George, you are on mute still, so you'll have to unmute.
I had a question about, do you expect any pockets of resistance to your plan? Where might those be? Will it be businesses, agriculture, cattle ranching? And also, how can you extend the influence of this plan to Okanagan County in general? Are you coordinating with commissioners or doing any of that sort of stuff?
Yeah, that's a really, really on point question. I think there's going to be, so in the plan, you'll see there's nothing that that stands alone that should really be incredibly controversial in terms of an action. It's a lot of things that people are already kind of talking about or familiar with. I think the challenge is just the framing, because climate change has been politicized over the years and stigmatized. And so there is definitely a group in our community who don't believe that climate change is human caused. And some of those people are also on the county commission. So that definitely poses some challenges, but I will say there's still a lot of common ground because we all agree that the climate is changing, that the seasons are getting more intense, hotter, drier, more wildfires, less water when we need it. And so we can all come together and problem solve around that. Regarding the mitigation piece and reducing emissions, that's probably where it will get a little stickier. That said, even that is, change is coming, and I know change is hard for people, but whether or not one personally believes in the need to electrify and switch electric vehicles, it's happening. It's coming our way. And so the question then becomes, are we ready for it? Are we here in the Methow ready, especially with such a tourist dependent economy, to receive those people who are going to come in their electric vehicles? It's just more and more, that is just the way it's going to be. So I think we're starting to see signs. For example, Chelan County is just issued a draft of their climate plan. And Joshua had a really great conversation with the Chelan County Commissioner, who is fully committed and on board to implementing it. And we're started having those conversations with our county commissioners. We have more work to do in that department, I'll say that. But I think the fact that it's coming from the community, that this is a community-driven plan, will carry a lot of weight. And that we have all three mayors leading this effort as well. So, you know, we're lucky to have some pretty powerhouse women who are in leadership in our community. And there's a lot that the towns can do to show the way and show those men on the Okanagan County Commission how it's done, is what I say. So I think it's doable. I think it's doable.
Yeah, great question. Val.
I was wondering if water storage has been one of the considerations, and in a small way, the beaver project concepts and so on. Is that all in the program?
Yes, it's been identified as one of the top priorities because we're going to have to figure out a way to do what snowpack used to do. Snowpack was our natural storage system and we're losing it. So what can we do? And of course, you know, the term storage is a loaded word. It can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. I certainly don't think there's any support for like a large dam in the Methow. So we don't, that's non-starter. But beavers, definitely. I mean, we're lucky to be leading in the state and in the West, really, on with the beaver project. It's way ahead of its time. And you know, even the Forest Service is starting that process, installing a lot of beaver dam analogs, for example, as part of the Mission project, and now as part of the Twist Restoration project. You know, there's things we need to fix about those projects, but the beaver dam analogs are exciting. And so we're just going to need more of that and more beavers. But I think we need also, you know, the plan says we need to look at other types of local storage solutions, things that maybe we weren't thinking of before, like rain barrels. which I know you're familiar with, Val. So rain barrels and just other systems that allow us to store water and at home and use it when we really need it.
Yeah. Great. Well, it's little after 11:15. I don't want to cut anybody off, but this is a big conversation. So I think this would be great
We're happy
to
to come back.
continue. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you
That's
for
great.
all the work you're doing.
Yeah, thank you for all your contributions. It looks like there was a follow-up suggestion connected to the land emissions conversation and around carbon credits being an asset that we could use, and that's definitely one of the pieces that's emerged as an action area. And so that is something that I actually had some students from Western look into last year as well. And so if you're interested in that, please reach out, because there's going to be a group forming to really look at the feasibility around that. And it's really great to connect with you all. I think that when we think about the climate solutions, so many of those are really intergenerational. And I think the ways that connects with, being able to age in place is really powerful. So I definitely see that as a way of multi-solving that, we could address both.